serve as a moderator of afternoon session. So in this session, we will have two speakers. The first one is Anna Elisabetta Galeotti, professor of political philosophy of University of Eastern Piedmont, Vercelli, Italy. Her specialty in political philosophy and ethics, public affairs. Yeah, please join me to welcome Professor Galeotti.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you to Nevi and Ben, the chair of this session, for this. And I should definitely better. Okay. So I shall start with, so to speak, preemptive apology, given that I am the only true real boomer in this audience. I have to say that my PowerPoint is very uncool. And so you have, it's basically more a handout than a PowerPoint. It's not sparkling, no images, nothing. So please do put up with me. No, being an old woman, what can I do? Okay, so what I'm going to call to talk today is about preposterous fake news. Why preposterous? What are preposterous fake news? So I mean cases of disinformation, such as the infamous Pizzagate, where the circle around Hillary Clinton was accused to have a pedophile activity in a pizza parlor in Washington. And, you know, the Iverman, a livestock dewormer as treatment of COVID, and other kind, or the magnitude of mass participation at Trump's inaugural ceremony in 2016 compared to the Obama inaugural lectures. So in other words, I'm going to talk about absurd pieces of information, define common and basic epistemic rules. This kind of information seems to be, can I say, paradigmatic case of irrationality, and the people holding or sharing, spreading this kind of information seems to be, appears to be the precisely irrational kind of. So one common question is how preposterous fake news can ever be believed by people endowed with even a minimum threshold of cognitive capabilities. Now, what I'm going to ask about that is, in the first part, how preposterous fake news comes to be shared and spread in the infosphere. And second, which kind of risk such spreading poses to democratic society, and third, what to do about it. So what I'm trying to argue here is that the epistemic status of the receivers of preposterous fake news is less clear than the epistemic status of the producers of fake news. Because most of the times, people who are reposting as being the subject of some of this morning presentation, most of the time, reposting does not mean endorsing and believing the message. So research on platform formerly named Twitter and now renamed X, considering a wide number of messages over a couple of years, has shown that 60% of users sharing a message have not even read its content. So what does it mean, reposting, if not believing? Okay. So some scholars think that reposting is just in order to convey the feelings of amusement, ironic detachment, or surprise, and not because it is believed to be true. Another interpretation holds that the primary function of the online communicative act does not consist in the transfer of information, but rather, how can I get a word? Oh, sorry. How can I move this screen, this part, this final, these windows, because otherwise, I don't know. What shall I do to move away? No, I just want to move away this part here. It's possible. Oh, yeah. No, that's not good. I'm sorry. Okay, now.
But not for the screen,
Okay.
because I've synced it up on here, so I'm just gonna,
Okay.
but it's not being shared, so if I
It's not
may.
being shared by who? Ah, because the people who are.
It was being shared. It closed somehow. I'm not sure what happened. Should be okay now.
No, but it's not okay because I cannot.
Oh,
I
because
mean,
this
it's
thing
not
is open.
readable.
I see. Well, one solution is to simply not share it, because then this bar goes away.
Or at least here. Okay, this is okay. Okay.
Okay.
So I say that some scholars think that reposting is just a way of conveying feelings of amusement, ironic detachment, or surprise, and not because it is believed to be true. And another interpretation holds that the primary function of the online communicative act does not consist in the transfer of information, but rather in the expression of emotional attitudes, especially in case of strong emotions such as outrage and disgust. But, yes.
You need to click the screen so that it's recognized as the primary window. And then try now.
Okay.
Okay.
So, sorry. So I'm trying here to follow and to present the expressive account of the sharing, no? Which I understand, I don't claim that is only possible account of sharing and spreading fake news, but in the case of preposterous fake news, it seems to me to be more likely, I'd say. So the expressive use account says that online communication is not meant to transmit information. Hence, it allows to question the doxastic assumption concerning fake news retransmitters. So what is the doxastic assumptions? The doxastic assumption takes that supporting fake news amounts to believe that that information is true. Instead, the non-doxastic thesis says that supporters of preposterous fake news do not really believe that fakes are true, since they have not considered the truth of the matter. The expressivist account, while conceding that reposting is also compatible with receivers forming beliefs as a result of their sharing, holds that receivers are rather concerned with expressing their affiliations and that that information is taken unreflectively in as consistent with their affiliation. So according to some of the people who share this account, Ikino and Raika thinks that this account is sustained by two psychological mechanisms. One is hope, and the other is signal of support of its creators of like-minded community. So in that respect, preposterous fake news are neither believed nor disbelieved, but simply taken on board as a flag for one's affiliation. A better elaboration of this idea refers to the analysis of convictions by Michael Lynch. Convictions are the endorsements of narratives corresponding narratives about the social and political reality corresponding to the subject aspirational identity, how she wants to be taken by others. So convictions are the practical versus epistemic endorsement of these narratives. And narratives are built around motivationally held core beliefs. For instance, that the elites are corrupt, that big pharma is lying, and things like that. And such motivationally held beliefs are the practical reason to take in other propositions without thinking about their truth as they fit into the whole narrative. Oh my God, what has happened? Okay. So let's go back to the example of the two pictures showing the inaugurational ceremony of respectively Obama and Trump's, the first Trump's the inaugurational ceremony this time has not yet taken place. So the two pictures clearly showed a much bigger crowd for the Obama's inauguration than for Trump's. Trump's supporters nevertheless supported the counter-evidential claim that Trump's crowd was much larger than Obama's. Now, the question is, did they believe it against their own visual perception? Hardly. I mean, either they discarded the photos showing a smaller crowd at Trump's inauguration as unreliable because of the conviction of the untrustworthiness of the official press, or the conviction that Trump was the true president of the common people was sufficient for them to repeat the Trumpist reading of the two pictures unreflectively. So what I'm saying, I have to say that I've just recently seen in a paper by Neil Levy, that there's been an empirical experiment on that, proving actually that the people supporting the two stories did not believe that the stories was true. So it was rather the underlying convictions pushing people to hang on the preposterous and absurd information simply because it fits the motivationally held narrative reinforcing one's identity and affiliation. And this is how somehow that spreading and supporting claims, preposterous claims of this kind comes in a way closer to the analysis I've done of self-deception, because it's a case in which you are defending your aspirational identities against contrary evidence, and then you, because of that, you support something which is counter-evidential. So there is some sort of, the difference is that in this case, there is no belief. It's simply, you know, presenting a claim and spreading this claim. So if that is true, if this, let's say, expressive account is plausible and is true, then no irrational beliefs can be ascribed to supporter of preposterous fake news. So what we're going to say is that the supporters of preposterous fake news are then blameless. No, it's not that the case, because they have an epistemic fault, because they hold a motivationally core beliefs, often epistemically unsound, That is what makes their narrative, the whole narratives, theories, and false information. But holding a motivationally holding a belief is much more widespread thought than believing counter-perceptual facts or absurd stories, as motivated beliefs are a common feature of human imperfection. So this interpretation of preposterous fake news suggests that the game of the online and often offline disinformation is not always governed by rules of epistemic rationality. Convictions are endorsed for identity reason, and the defense of one's convictions against contrary evidence appears reasonable in order to protect that one's identities. So, as Lynch said, convictions makes it practically rational, epistemically irrational. And that is where the parallel with self-deception comes, because as we might know, there has been a long discussion whether, self-deception can be considered as practically rational in the sense that it works. Its goal is to defend, so to speak, the self or some aspect of the self, despite being epistemically irrational. This is very controversial because, of course, this is the idea that there are two paths to rationality, but I don't want to get into this point. Okay. So now, and we will see why this interpretation may be important for facing the social problems that this kind of preposterous fake news poses to our society. So the wide diffusion of preposterous fake news has this important consequence on the social fabric of democratic society, because it contributes to the erosion of mutual trust, therefore engendering the overall stability of democratic systems. Because in democratic system, in the social order, agents ought to trust one another, both as putative sources of knowledge and reliable testimony, and for keeping reasonable expectations that citizens will support fair terms of cooperation. So widespread mistrust erodes the stability of political systems, for it fosters the loss of a shared common ground of knowledge, meanings, and ideas. So in a way, the spreading of preposterous fake news and by preposterous fake news, I mean the whole bunch of, not this single, but all the strange conspiracy theory, all kinds of very absurd disinformation, which is spreading, that fits a vicious circle in which the breach of trust among fellow citizens comes along with the loss of a common background of knowledge and shared meanings. In turn, that weakens the overall feeling to be part of a collective enterprise. So, particular preposterous fake news contributes to the polarization of political and epistemic positions, and not on the ground of their truth value, epistemic quality, and political soundness, but on what attracts more clicks, likes, and funds. Implicitly or explicitly, those professing preposterous fake news are regarded by the other, co-citizens as epistemically impaired, if not inferior. Symmetrically, those who are professing preposterous fake news see their fellows, their opponents, their fellow citizens' opponents, as either deceitful elites or dupe fellows who do not understand how they are manipulated by the establishment, but nevertheless, despite being duped by the establishment, display intellectual arrogance. So one side in this polarization of position, one side is considered epistemically untrustworthy, and the others as ethically and politically untrustworthy. So this is what this spreading can cause. So the problem is, what are we going to do with that? Because let's say in the political theory, one of the contemporary political theory of the Rossian tradition was in one important civic virtue is reasonableness. That is to a sort of reciprocity and acknowledgements of the share, what Roscoe called the shared burden of reasons, so that everyone, which leads to a sort of fallibilistic position, so that no one is really intellectually arrogant. So that is how the mutual trust can be maintained in a society. But here we are assisting a breach of this mutual trust. So let's say how the reasonable people in the society and the reasonable, let's say, scientific authorities and the elites can respond to the groups of people supporting and spreading this kind of absurdities. How can they relate to them in a way that can lead to a mending of the breach of social trust? So I think that the expressivist account can help a little bit, much, but can help to move towards a reestablishment of trust, or to move towards in a path toward the reestablishment of trust. Because on the one hand, the non-doxastic nature of preposterous fake news makes the supporters of preposterous fake news less irrational than one might have thought. And on the other hand, the expressivist account suggests to examine the roots at the conventions of the convention connected with the aspirational identity and underline the preposterous claims more cautiously. So what is at the roots of the convictions baked in preposterous fake news? So despite the variety of core, the core belief at the root of preposterous fake news comes down to the view that the political, economic, and scientific establishment governing liberal societies is corrupt, deceitful, and untrustworthy. This has been acknowledged by scholars holding some version of the non-doxastic and expressivist thesis. And moreover, the interesting point is that while there are all these scholars coming from epistemology holding the non-doxastic and expressivist thesis, then their view meets with the view of those who are studying populism, because the core belief that the elite are untrustworthy represents, so to speak, the point of departure of the studies on populism. So many scholars have thus pointed out an overlap between those professing political fake news and believers in pseudoscience, no-vaxxers, conspiracy theories, all sharing an anti-establishment attitude and feeding up discontent in liberal democracy, making our society even more polarized and divided. A common diagnosis is that pseudoscience is motivated not so much by the content of the relevant claims and the evidence on which the theories are based, as they are by the wariness of elite authorities. So one should ask at this point, what has caused this wariness of authorities and against that part of citizenry identified with establishment, namely the liberal elites. And there are various responses in the social sciences, social and political sciences, but there is one response that seems to me particularly interesting, and there's some empirical basis and foundation. And the thesis is that the status threat perceived by the lower strata of the cultural majority, and by cultural majority, I mean for Western society, the white heterosexual Christian males, just as a sort of general groups, but you can find many other specification. The lower strata of the cultural majority in multicultural societies may have played a crucial role, and the fact that the status threats may have played a crucial role has found some empirical evidence. Okay. So if that is, let's say, in a very nutshell, the possible diagnosis of the problem, here is a very sketchy roadmap for mending social trust. And social trust should be mended by two parts supplementing each other. One is something that I'm not dealing here, and it's basically political action, politics for structural fights against inequalities, okay? But this is not something I'm going to talk about. And the second has to do with the attitudinal response that reasonable citizens, public officials, and epistemic authorities should adopt towards those expressing preposterous fake news. So I'm focusing here not so much on the policies which would be necessary to mending social trust, but rather on the attitudinal response of the people who are somehow embodying the authorities or are perceived as the elites by those embodying expressing preposterous fake news. So what this attitudinal response should be? I think it is giving up the posture of know-it-all. What has been called the tyranny of the articulates by Daniel Weinstock, the way. And the tyranny of the articulates, which goes against the idea that the others are the basket of deplorables, as it was said reported by Hillary Clinton. And therefore, the giving up this posture implies adopting an attitude of intellectual humility. Okay, so intellectual humility opposes the vice of intellectual arrogance. But there are different definitions and versions of intellectual humility, and the one I favor is the other regarding one, according to which neither epistemic doubts nor the fallibilistic outlook concerning one's beliefs are fit grounds for this virtue, but rather the grounds for these virtues is a concern for other people, for engaging with them, for understanding their reasons, and for jointly deliberate together. So the other regarding understanding of intellectual humility is compatible with confronting not only epistemic peers, but also people that one has reasons to judge as cognitively unequal, maybe because they are less educated or not expert on the matter or unaware of new evidence. So this version of intellectual humility, I think, is the appropriate virtue that representatives of institutions, epistemic authorities, and reasonable citizens ought to adopt when approaching people who appear to hold irrational views and exhibit dubious epistemic credentials. So I think that approaching them with intellectual humility means comes down to respect them as fellow citizens and to consider them as partners is in the collective enterprise. So the primary goal of adopting intellectual humility is not that of changing views by persuasion and debiasing preposterous fake news, though it would be ideal, but very unlikely, but it's rather to make the people supporting preposterous fake news feel that they are taken seriously and they are not belittled. Though no evidence is available of the positive effect of intellectual humility for mending epistemic and social trust, there is abundant evidence that intellectual arrogance induces and deepens mistrust. So approaching absurd claims with a dismissive of worse, disdainful attitude worsens the situation and increases the polarization. So conclusions. The expressivist account I've defended admits of a non-doxative considerations of those reposting and spreading preposterous fake news. Those who express preposterous fake news are not necessarily believers, but rather flag wavers of their affiliation and aspirational identity. In that respect, they are less irrational than usually thought. So in order to mend the breach of social and epistemic trust produced by the spreading of preposterous fake news, the establishment and reasonable citizen ought, and here is really a normative ought, is duty, is let's say, a moral duty to adopt intellectual humility when relating with supporters of preposterous fake news. And I think I have concluded these are reference.
Thank you very much, Dr. Galeotti. I think it's very important presentation, and actually many people are interested in that and worry about this. We have many questions, so we have about 50 minutes.
Thank you so much. I worry, and this is something I've thought about and written about, very similar sort of concerns and trying to tackle a very similar kind of problem. But I worry that there's a very strong tension in what you conclude at the end, because on the one hand, so if at the end you're saying adopting a certain kind of unregarding intellectual humility, where you're, the way that you described it, where you're asking people for their reasons, where we're partners in this deliberating together as mutual inquirers, but at the same breath, you're sort of talking about people. If you're adopting a perspective where you're saying that people aren't believing what they profess to be believing, but they're actually just expressing identity allegiances. So it's very difficult. The problem that's been pointed out to me many times is that there's going to be a worrisome kind of deception in this kind of engagement, because you're talking to, if you start asking someone, well, why do you believe that? Let's discuss this. Let's look at the evidence. If you're going to be talking to them that way, you're appearing as if you take them to be believing what they say they believe, and yet you're, in your mind, you're like, well, they're really doing something different. And so it's a very tricky thing to hold both of those together, to say this is not a real belief, it's some kind of expressions of flag waving, and yet I'm going to treat them as an equal partner in inquiry. And you see, it's a really big tension. And just very quickly, I mean, one of the worries about non-doxasticism that I worry about very, very much, and you put Neil Levy on the list of non-doxasticists, but I would not put him there, because he's really pretty clear that we have to often take people seriously, that they're not just expressing allegiance. The Pizzagate guy went with a shotgun, right?
Well, the only one.
Yeah,
I mean, there were thousands who were, but the only one who was the only one who believed in that.
Well, I worry, I just think that if we don't, like, there's a concern of, I think there's a real worry about about not taking people seriously in what they say, because, I mean, he was one, we don't know, we don't know, I think it's often the case, but that's beside the point, but this tension of really being, taking that intellectually, humble state, but then at the same time, in our minds saying, well, you don't really, your reasons, you're gonna tell me, the reasons you're gonna give me is you're gonna give me point to the evidence, like of course, everyone knows, like, often people who believe in conspiracy, they have all kinds of evidence, that to point to, but you're not really wanting that, you're wanting to do something else, and so there's just, you see that there's this tension.
I understand that you were pointing out a sort of duplicity and this intellectual humility attitude, because on the one hand, you want to be humble, on the other hand, you are instead of pretending that they are believing what they are not believing. But what I'm suggesting is precisely not doing that. What I'm suggesting is that we have to bracket the epistemic problem. We are not trying to persuade them that the evidence is something. We have to adopt a strategy which has been adopted 300 years ago when the religious war broke out in Europe. And what was the only way to get out of the religious war? Toleration. And what was the strategy of toleration? Bracketing. What was part of the conflict? And find some common ground. So this intellectual humility should display not trying to convince, look, there is this and that, but trying to find, let's talk about inequality in economic distribution. Let's talk in something else on which we can find common grounds, and then on that to build trust.
Yeah, I think that's great, but on that list that you had, you were like, ask them for their reasons. You had that included, and that's not what you, that's not what
I mean, you can ask of their reason about the dissatisfaction with the elites, not the reason about believing what they are saying that they are. But okay, it's complicated, but I understand. I see your point. You're right in that respect.
Okay, let's move to next.
Thanks so much. I'll just ask a follow-up on that. A different way you could go in response to that tension is to really distinguish the core, I think you call them core motivational beliefs, from the core beliefs from the PFN claims. And then you could say, let's have intellectual humility about the core beliefs and not have it about the PFNs. And then when it comes to core beliefs, like, for example, do public health officials sometimes mislead the public? Have a real, responsible argument about that, and be open-minded and be willing to change your views on potentially the core beliefs, because that's what these people saying PFNs really care about. That's what they really believe. Let's actually have genuine, intellectual inquiry about those things and leave those as open. And maybe just not talk about the PFNs, because really that's what they ultimately care about. So I think that's a different response. And I'm curious what you think of that as a way of going.
Yeah, I think that may be an interesting way of going. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. I want to point out the solution part where you mentioned about intellectual humbleness. I am not from the philosophy department, I'm a discourse analysis, but I sometimes do feel like that intellectual humbleness is for the point receivers. They feel like they're doing this intellectual humbleness specifically for them. So there is a if you were talking to people of the same intellectual level, you do not have to do the humbleness. So there's still, even though you're trying to level out the hierarchical differences between the speaker and the receiver, there's still an implicit intellectual hierarchy behind purposefully trying to be humble. I do not know what do you make of this problem.
Okay, thank you. I see the point, but that is precisely the sense of this other regarding view of intellectual humility, which doesn't require to displays only with intellectual peers. It can displays in cases of asymmetrical relations, not because, and these asymmetrical relations do not imply that you are thinking that the other person is an idiot. You can think that this person is less educated or is not an expert in this specific field, in medicines or in something else. And that doesn't make this person an idiot, simply someone who is at your, you can impute them the same potential epistemic capabilities without knowing that in that specific field, this person is not an expert. And when a teacher, now, of course, a teacher knows more than the school, but you can imagine that each teacher can be intellectually arrogant or can be intellectually humble in the sense that you can recognize that the students and pupils are to learn and you can respect them despite the fact that you know that they know less than you do. So the idea is to give them respect, and somehow to convey this feeling of respect, either like Simon was suggesting, finding specific place, like, or focusing on specific place, or finding common grounds and discussing of these common grounds, and not trying to forcing them in the biasing or the banking situation, which apparently these strategies are not particularly successful. So it seems to be. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Now your turn.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I enjoyed it. I have a very similar concern here. So my worry is with intellectual humility. The reason why you have so many flag bearers, or you say flag wavers, is that I think that the societies are becoming more and more polarized, and that the other side is considered as an existential threat, a threat towards one's way of life. And then you get people riling up in these camps because if the other side wins, that's the end of the world. This is, for example, in my country, in Serbia, is like that. I've noticed with the latest American elections, many of my friends were posting stuff on Facebook like it's the end of the world. So the other side is perceived as a threat. And then everything, in love and war, everything is allowed. So people rally up.
Despite the fact that has been shown that is not true.
Well, so it's not true. But I would say that in this case, many people are defending ridiculous things because the other side is perceived as a very important threat. And I don't think how intellectual humility would work in this way, because any kind of humility assumes that I will grant the other side that they have something to offer. But if I think that what the other side has to offer is an existential threat to me, I will not be ready to do that. And the second thing that I wanted to say, I really think that you would be surprised what kind of stuff people believe. In my country, you have to go into the army. We are all kind of bubbled up and we hang out with people who are similar. When they send you into the army, you see actually how things function. You would be surprised what people believe. You would be surprised how difficult it is to deconvince, how do you say it in English, people who believe ridiculous things. And you do self-deception. People want to believe these things. If you have a terrible life and someone comes up with this magnificent story, you want to believe it. You want to live there. Why do people like sports so much? They enjoy other people's successes because their lives are miserable. You know why sport is popular in Serbia? Because Serbia is poor and people don't want to be unhappy. So they all play basketball, so they all play football. So when Serbia plays football, you have dead people on the court side because it's so important that your team wins. And this is what's happening in the social sphere now. I think that actually I'm talking too much. But the idea is that first, you would be surprised what people believe. And second, no matter how much I like your idea, I worry that the practical application is very far away because the sides see each other as existential threat. And in certain cases, this is really so. If I lose elections, I'm going to prison. Like in countries like Serbia. If you lose elections, you're going to prison then.
Okay, well, it's true that society are very polarized, but the idea is that in this polarization, there is one side. First of all, I'm not sure whether there's just two sides. I mean, the polarization is more complex. I mean, analysis, we are trying to make an analysis of contemporary society where the relevant groups are at least three. So it's not something. So the appeal to intellectual humility is not so much to the fans of one side or the others, but are to the reasonable people. I mean, it's a normative question. Okay, it's a normative question. What one should do if wants to be a citizen endowed with a civic virtue of reasonableness. So if you want to be a reasonable citizen, you have to embrace intellectual humility, no matter how heavy is this task, and no matter how this is not reciprocated, because as you might know, you're not political philosopher for your good sake, but if you were political philosophy, you will know that the reasonableness is usually is in the ideal theory by Rawls is a civic virtue only on a reciprocal basis. While in a non-ideal circumstances, like our society, what we are asking is that reasonable people has to be doubly reasonable. And so to adopt this kind of virtue, which is clearly a difficult task to do, I don't say that it's not something easy. And of course, in the polarization, there are some positions, I mean, on one side and the other side, that cannot be convinced to these adoptions because of what you were saying. But there are in the middle a lot of positions that seeing the others as an existential threat or whatever, I mean, a status threat or whatever kind of threat they represent is something that doesn't lead anyway. And so this kind of what I'm trying to appeal to, not just me, but also my co-authors, is to reasonable people, not to the ones who are unreasonable by the standards of what they are saying. But otherwise, I mean, then if we talk only among reasonable people, we are in an echo chambers and we don't arrive to any. I'm not saying that this is an easy task and the solution is behind the corner. No, but it's at least a little step. Definitely being intellectually arrogant doesn't take that risk.
Thank you. We have to end it here. Time runs out. Thank you very much. And due to some calculation problem, I guess we will we should end maybe 10 minutes later for this session.
There is a discussion later. So the next talk will last 30
Yeah.
minutes. I don't know why we have to get to that.
Yeah, the next speaker will have 30 minutes. Yeah, so we will have some, maybe see that Professor Kevin, yeah, Professor Hong is assistant professor at the University of Macau, the sociology department, and also associate research associate at Harvard, evolutionary biology, right?
Human evolution biology.
Human evolution biology. So please join me to welcome Professor Wang.
Yes. You like? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm really pleased to be here. I especially appreciate the encouragement from Dr. Nivia Dorsini for me to present this piece of work here. This is work in progress, and I very much look forward to comments and feedback on how to improve this. Okay, I'm going to do two things primarily in this talk. First is to introduce a problem that I consider interesting and may appear interesting to some of you. And the second part is going to be my little small empirical project. It's not super significant, as you can see, because of constraints on sample size and other factors, but I'm hoping I'm asking the right kind of question. Okay, so it's going to be about the nature of religious beliefs, had something to do with the previous talk, but it's going to be about religious beliefs in general. So scholars have argued, I want to provide specific references, that to say that someone believes in the existence of God or some sort of supernatural entities feels different from saying someone believes that there are chairs in this room. Okay, so there's that intuition. And recently, Neil van Leeuwen has written an article published in Cognition arguing that we should really treat these two different kinds of beliefs as qualitatively different attitudes, cognitive attitudes, all right? So I believe in chairs in this room, there are just chairs in this room. I believe it's going to rain tomorrow, right? Factual. Whereas saying that I believe in the existence of Jesus Christ, okay, it serves other purposes, could signal on social identity and so forth. By the way, I'm going to say that I don't agree with that view. I'm more on the other side. And more recently, he's got a book, Religion as Make-Believe. As you can tell from the title, it's saying that what I think a rather provocative and radical argument that religious beliefs in general are just sort of are similar to pretend play, that people are just, we should not take them seriously. Okay. And then there are responses, right? People are disagreeing with that argument. So this is Martin Baudry, who's written quite a bit arguing against Neil van Leeuwen's idea. He says that his thesis contradicts the wealth of data on religiously motivated behavior. By and large, the faithful genuinely believe what they profess to believe. We should take those beliefs seriously. Often, okay, most of the time. And there is a common failure for secular people to face the fact that some religious people really do believe wildly implausible things. Okay, and we should have that that mentality to be able to appreciate the possibility that people really do believe in wildly strange things. All right, going back to Neil van Leeuwen's original argument. He says factual beliefs has 3 characteristics in contrast with the religious beliefs. All right. First two are something that I consider interesting, but I'm not going to talk about in detail because it's not about, it's not related to my empirical project. Factual beliefs, according to him, are practical setting independent, which means factual beliefs are used in practical reasoning and action choices across practical settings, different practical settings, meaning that if I say I believe that it's raining outside, it's going to serve as a kind of guidance for my reasoning and subsequent behavior. If I go out, I might want to bring an umbrella, all right? Cognitively govern other attitudes, by which he means factual beliefs are the basis of drawing inferences among other cognitive attitudes. I'm not a philosopher by training, so my interpretation might be a bit philosophically naive, but I think he means that when there's a potential conflict between different kinds of cognitive attitudes, it's the factual beliefs that trumps over other kinds of attitudes. Okay, so that's those are the first 2 characteristics. The third one is what I'm interested in for the most part, that factual beliefs are evidentially vulnerable. Factual beliefs tend to be, this is the word that he uses, extinguished, right? Reduced, diminished by evidence contrary to them. I believe it's raining outside. I go outside, it's not raining. Okay, now my former belief in the rain outside gets extinguished. Okay, and he's going to say that religious beliefs are not like that. They are evidentially invulnerable, meaning that contrary evidence does not extinguish religious beliefs. All right. So that is the summary of the research background of this project. There are debates, pretty serious ones, regarding the impact of empirical evidence on religious beliefs, broadly defined. And I'm interested in specifically a kind of religious behavior and beliefs involved in those behavior that's petitionary prayers. You pray for something to happen in very concrete senses. These are requests made to a deity of some sort for specific outcomes. And it is very common, extremely common across a number of religious traditions, both in monotheistic Abrahamic religions and traditional religious practices in traditional small-scale societies. In this project, we look at different religious communities in China, including Christians, Muslims, and what we call folk religionists. These are people who practice some form of either ancestor worship or the worship of local deities, polytheistic traditions, as case studies for the effect of petitionary prayer successes or failures. Basically, I'm going to ask a bunch of vignettes to people who follow these religious traditions. What do they think the protagonist's belief are going to be affected when they pray for something, something happened, they pray for something, something doesn't happen, okay? All right, specifically research questions. Do the outcomes of petitionary prayers affect religious beliefs and religious behaviors? Do people update their belief in response to the outcomes of petitionary prayers in a roughly Bayesian fashion? Now here, I want to say roughly because I'm really just interested in directionality. Okay? So the assumption is that if they are evidentially vulnerable to some extent, then when they pray for something and it fails, their confidence in the existence or benevolence of that deity should decrease. Okay, so that's the predicted direction of belief updating by Bayesianism, and if the prayer turns out to be successful, then their confidence in their faith, their belief in the existence of the deity should increase. All right. Methodology, we conducted surveys. My students conducted surveys with vignette questions. I'm going to show what those are in a minute. It's within subject design, meaning that we ask the same subjects same questions. Okay, and we randomize the order of questions. There's no incentive provided. We also conducted semi-structured interviews, especially regarding the kinds of events or circumstances that the subjects, the participants, consider as possibly affecting some believers' religious belief. What are the potential hypothetical possible situations that a believer might experience, and as a result, he lost faith, or his faith in God, some deity diminished? Okay. So we designed a survey in Qualtrics, and we asked the participants to scan a QR code, and this is what they see. A bunch of questions in Chinese now. I have translations for you in English later. It takes about 7 to 8 minutes. It's a short questionnaire. Here are the examples of the vignettes that we use. There's this different topics. We have 4 different topics, and with 2 possible outcomes, right? Either the prayer is successful or the prayer is a failure. And we asked both the possible belief change and behavior change, by which we mean the likelihood of the same protagonist praying to the same deity in the future. Is that going to increase or decrease as a result of prayer success or failure? All right, so this is the one of the scenarios. Xiaoming, this person is Christian who prays and worships regularly. Before taking his college entrance exam, which is a big deal in China, he prayed earnestly to God to be admitted to his desired school and also studied pretty hard for the exam. However, when the results came out, he did not perform well and failed to get into the school of his choice. How do you think his belief in God may change because of this? That's the yet scenario. And we presented participants with a Likert scale choices of 7 from definitely decrease to definitely increase. Here's another example. This one concerns with safe travel. Xiaobai, this person is Christian. His father often has to travel for work, and before going on a long-distance flight for business trip, Xiaobai prayed earnestly to God for his father's safe return. Flight went well, and his father returned home safely after the business trip. How do you think his belief in God may change because of this event? Right? So that's the belief question. There is a behavior question right after this. Afterward, Xiaobai's mother also needs to take a plane for a business trip due to work. Similar situation. How do you think is the likelihood that Xiaobai, same person, will pray to God, may be affected? And it's the same Likert scale from definitely decrease to definitely increase. Okay. And here are the samples that we have. We have Muslims in Yunnan province in this region Shadian in Yunnan province, and it's very high concentration Muslims, about 90-something%. We have Christians from Fuzhou in Fujian province here. This is from one particular church that my student RA has connection with, and also we went to Quanzhou, also Fujian province, to collect data for folk religionists. These are people who would go to temples to pray for that one specific local deity for very concrete outcomes. Sorry, I have time. Any questions about the setup? No. Okay, and here are the results. Firstly, these are results from local deity worshippers, ancestor worshippers. From Quanzhou, we've got 44 participants. And on the top panel here, we have belief change. So we rescale the score, I guess, normalize the score, so that the neutral response is 0. 0 means no change. Positive scores means an increase, and negative score means decrease. So what we discover is that all participants, on average, local deity worshippers predicted the protagonist to increase his or her future praying effort, regardless of the outcome of the prayer. Now, there is a difference in the magnitude of that increase in that in cases when the prayer is successful, the increase in behavior in future circumstances is its magnitude is larger than when the previous prayer is a failure, right? But it's all positive on average. I'm going to try to explain why that is. I guess offer a few speculations. For belief change, same normalization, 0 means no change. This is what I consider Bayesian rational in terms of directions that participants indicate. When the prayer is a success, participants evaluate the protagonist's belief change in the existence of the deity to be positive. In the case of prayer failure, denoted by the red bars here, some of these are not really statistically significant, but the direction seems to be that the protagonists are estimated to decrease their belief in whatever local deity that they're asked to report about. All right, and these are results from Christians from the church in Fuzhou. It's a Methodist church, and the patterns for behavior change are largely the same as with the folk religionists. Belief change quite similar. So the belief change would be Bayesian rational in terms of directionality. When the prayer is presented as a failure, protagonists are evaluated to decrease their belief, whereas when the prayer is a success, there's a relatively large increase in the magnitude of the reported belief change, the increase. These are data from the Muslims, and as we see, there's something with this I have to think about. Exam success scenario, but the reported behavior change for the protagonists are all positive, and there doesn't seem to be significant differences regarding whether the prayer is a success or a failure, except for this one. Interestingly, the reported belief change for the protagonists are always positive. So Muslim participants are saying that even if the prayer is a failure, the protagonist, who is also Muslim in scenario, will increase his or her belief in Allah, okay, in their God. We do notice that there is difference in magnitude between prayer successes and prayer failures, but the direction, so this would be Bayesian irrational, I guess, in the directionality of their belief updating. We also have a separate group as a sort of control. These are non-believers in Chenzhou who profess that they don't believe in any God, and we applied the Christian scenario to these people. And the patterns that we observe here are pretty much the same as the folk religionists, although the estimated belief change, the decrease in belief in cases of prayer failure is more significant. So the magnitude for non-believers, this would be more Bayesian rational if we take into account the magnitude of estimated belief change. All right. We also see a small decrease. So this is only observed for non-believers when they were asked to evaluate a Christian protagonist. So they say that when there is a prayer failure, the protagonist there is a reduced probability or likelihood for the same protagonist to pray to Jesus Christ in the future when there's a similar situation. All right, so this is a summary of from the quantitative data. Most participants expect an increase in future praying behavior regardless of previous prayer outcomes. In general, the increase in belief due to prayer success is more substantial in magnitude than the decrease in belief due to prayer failures. Third, followers of Islam appear to update their religious belief in the opposite direction of rational Bayesian updating. We're talking about directionality here. They would increase belief in God in case of prayer failures. And that is the most notable difference between the Muslim group and all the other groups. We also have some result data that's interesting insight from qualitative interview. I'm not sure if any of you is Muslim, but apparently there is the meaning of Muslim is total submission to the will of God. So they would very explicitly say that their belief, or a true Muslim's belief in God, will never change, regardless of what happens. So they would say, for devout Muslim, there's no circumstance that can diminish or eradicate their faith. Everything, all good and bad, come from God's arrangement, and both sides are inherent in everything. Ultimately, it is always God's loving kindness towards us. There's a grand plan, right? Everything is predetermined in some way. And this reminds me of something that this is former US President Reagan. He said he was raised as a, I guess, conservative Christian. He said he was raised to believe that God has a plan for everyone and that seemingly random twists of fate are all part of his plan. Okay, so it expresses a similar attitude that this is all to be expected. Some players are going to fail, but that's okay. It's right. God has the ultimate benevolent intention for everybody. I'm going to finish this in 15 minutes. A few outstanding puzzles. These are questions, and I have some speculations, obviously. Why do subjects expect that future praying behavior of the protagonists to increase even when previous failed prayers have lowered their belief? So they would say that, okay, for Christians, for folk religionists, for example, they say that if a prayer fails, then yes, they're going to lower their belief in the existence of God. But in the future, if a similar circumstance arises, they're going to increase their effort to pray to the same deity. So that's a bit puzzling. Speculations. The protagonists may be doubling down, given the very significant emotional investment in prayers. And this is especially true when no obvious alternatives exist. So in economics, I think this is sometimes referred to as sunk cost. You've already invested in this so much, and you just feel like this, it's the sensible thing for you to do is to double down your effort. It could also be the case that the protagonist attributing failure to a lack of sincerity, and therefore they want to make it up by engaging in more religious actions, by intensifying their religious effort. I have to think a bit more about the computational mechanisms behind this intuition. Another puzzle, I guess it's not really a puzzle, but something worth noting is Muslim participants increase their professed belief, or they would evaluate some other Muslim to increase their belief in God, even in the case of prayer failures. Well, in some sense, Islam and some conservative versions of Christianity are designed to evade empirical refutations. It's in their holy books. Right? They explicitly tell you that sometimes your prayer is going to fail. So be prepared for those. Those are going to be tests, challenges for you to overcome. Right, so test of faith. Muslims and to a lesser extent Christians may readily interpret prayer failures as God's tests. So you are faced with this test, and it's up to you to decide whether you want to keep your faith or go to hell if you abandon your faith because of occasional prayer failures. So this is acknowledgements. So these are the actual people who collected the data. I'm also, I have some money to run survey studies on Prolific to apply the same vignettes from individuals with very different cultural background and see if the same patterns hold, so that I can make some more generalized, robust claims. All right, thanks so much. I look forward to questions. Yep.
Yeah, go ahead. About 8 minutes.
Yeah, one thing I think I was noticing is different of the prayers would be more or less likely to happen independent of prayer. So like doing really well in a college exam is unlikely to happen, but your father surviving a plane flight is very likely to happen. So if the people were being Bayesian rational, I would expect that how strongly they thought that the prayer being answered was evidence would be sensitive to the likelihood of the thing happening conditional on, prayer working compared to the likelihood of it happening conditional on prayer not working. That'd be the likelihood ratios. But it looked to me like in your data, maybe people were not being sensitive to that. And that would be kind of a bit Bayesian irrational.
Right. So for Bayesian rationality, we were really interested in directionality because there's all kinds of factors that goes into people's actual responses. We do have a condition I did not talk about because it's messy, where I'm thinking about possibly running something in the future, and that is in two of the scenarios. There is if you can see, there is what failure? this is illness. That one of your family members is experiencing an illness with a survival rate of 40%. Another illness, another kind of cancer with a survival rate of 90%. I think that's, yeah, so everything else is equal, and it's not significant. I did some preliminary tests, but I think that's because of the lack of power, that we only have this number of. Yeah, but that would be the Bayesian rational prediction that subjects would be sensitive to that.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question about the general sort of,
yeah,
I don't know, takeaway, and one about the design. So about the general takeaway, you started by saying you disagree with Van Leuven, that you don't regard religious beliefs as non-factual, so to say, but this evidence somehow seems to go in that direction insofar as belief, behavior, etc. So I wonder, what about that? I'll just tie the next question and then I'll leave you space to. My other curiosity is why you chose a third-person design. So if you were meant to test this hypothesis, I would have expected that you would ask, that is still fallible. Like I might tell you how I would revise my belief and how I would act and still get things wrong if I'm talking about myself. But surely if I'm talking about the third person, that's a different story. So I wonder why you went for.
Yeah. We answer the second question first. We designed vignettes in third person for a reason. That is, we were afraid if we frame the question, the scenarios in the first person, there might be social desirability issues that subjects might want to signal that they are really good Christian, they're really good Muslims to the interviewer. And this is especially based on my conversation with the RAs who are very familiar with the religious communities that they are running these surveys, especially for Muslims. If you just ask like what your beliefs are going to change in response to these prayer failures, that's kind of insulting. So we want to, it's really not ideal. I understand that part. But I think, so in some sense, we're asking about the social norms in that community, right? What do subjects expect? An average, right?
Maybe I was wondering actually if the results you got on the Muslim community, you were considering several explanations, but you didn't mention this one that you just mentioned. So that was my intuition, that in that case, maybe the Christian, the atheist, the folk religion people, they don't think that it's, they don't mind communicating that the third person would revise their belief in this way. They don't think it's socially unacceptable, but maybe the Muslim thinks so. So they think, they shouldn't express, even if that's what they think, maybe they think it would be problematic,
right,
to fill the form, to fill the survey in that way. So I wonder if the results are polluted in exactly that sort of way, which could explain the asymmetry you got there if there is a stronger pressure in that group. Just a thought.
Yeah. So you mentioned the results being polluted. This is really a first step, and we're not making specific claims about what exactly are the factors in these religious traditions such that we observe different results. I am more trying to say that there is, it seems that if we just ask these straightforward, simple vignette scenarios to individuals in different religious traditions, there is a spectrum of response, right? So it's not the case that all religious people treat their religious beliefs as evidentially invulnerable. That these are, so I think Van Leuven is making a universal claim. He's saying that religious beliefs are just, that we should not take them seriously. And especially he makes that argument in the book. So I'm saying that there is a range of possibilities, the kinds of attitudes that religious people have towards their professed beliefs in this context. Yeah. Thank you.
I see many people raise their hand, we only have room for three. Okay. And get
Someone didn't ask the question.
Yeah, so probably the student, the student. We still have some time during the coffee break. Exactly.
I was just wondering, like, I mean, although I do not study Islamism, I come from Buddhist background. But the thing is that where you're talking about that we should take religious beliefs seriously, believers, and the differences that is happening here. I also think there's a relation with the preacher or the priest they go to. So just on the, like, just the believer is not the only action, or like the person is taking action here. Like if I fail, I ask for something, and if I fail to fulfill that, and I believe that there must be a reason for it, basically these people goes back to the priest, or they find someone who are knowledgeable in that religion. So
For explanations, right? Why it fails.
maybe sometimes it can be or something, but they do try to find out their answers, and the answers are found. That's why they are still believing, and even believe even more.
Yeah. So obviously there's all kinds of post hoc rationalizations that people can resort to. I mean, in cases of prayer failures, I am really, so I'm more of a Bayesian on this matter. I feel like if I just ask about the directionality of belief change, regardless of the kinds of post hoc rationalizations that you seek out, like it's your belief should be affected, right? One way or another. It either increases or decreases. And Bayesian rationality gives specific predictions about the directionality. So that's really the evidential vulnerability part that I'm interested in. I want to see the extent to which they are evidentially vulnerable. Obviously, you can always find explanations to account for failures, but that doesn't mean that your core belief is not affected at all.
Okay, last question. Okay, maybe keep the question very brief. Yeah.
Well, in a way, I just have to defend Neil. I disagree with him a lot. We are, I go see tomorrow, I'm gonna be like going against him. But I think I have to just I have to inhabit him for a moment, because you kept saying that he on his view, he doesn't take religious beliefs seriously. Or as he would say, when called religious beliefs, he would call them religious cognitive attitudes. So, right, so there's two different kinds of cognitive attitudes. One is factual beliefs, and then ones that are religious cognitions. But he thinks his view actually takes them more seriously. In a way, it's kind of similar to what was talking about in the last talk, because he thinks that the problem is if you treat them as factual cognitions, then you're going to ultimately like deem them to be irrational. But if you recognize that it's a different kind of cognition, then the norms that govern them are different than the norms that govern factual beliefs. And so you're actually, he thinks, you're taking the religious life much more seriously than if you.
Yeah. So seriously, I guess by seriously, I mean seriously in the factual sense, that take them seriously as factual beliefs, or in the same general way as factual belief, that they are evidentially vulnerable, that they guide practical actions and reasoning.
Yeah, when you said he thinks of them as like you're playing this game of make believe, which is right, you certainly made it sound as if he was saying, given that they are just, you know, that they have a sort of less of a status. Like, that's the way it really came across when you were when you were like describing his view. Like you see from his book, Religion's Make Believe, that this is just there's just a game, and so we're not taking it seriously. So it really.
I mean, seriously in a particular way, I guess I should say. Yeah, I read the book. I have a book review. It's forthcoming that I co-authored with Martin Bordry. So I look forward to how Neil respond to that.
We have to ask. We might continue to discuss during the coffee hour. Thank you very much. Yeah. I thought you would ask the last question.
So fine,
Yeah,
I'm
so that you
actually
get a chance.
talk